Rejected by my mate and cast out. Now I'm the alpha who will make them beg for forgiveness. Chapter 1. The Fall. What if the one person you trusted with your heart becomes the very one to shatter it? The forest was unnaturally still, the air heavy with the promise of a storm that would never come. Kayla stood at the edge of the clearing, the winds whipping her hair around her face. It wasn't the howl of the storm that had broken her, it was the quiet, the hollow silence that followed Dorian's rejection. It was as if the earth itself had stopped turning when he uttered those words, the ones that had shattered everything she knew. You are no longer the alpha of this pack. His words echoed in her mind, each one a blade slicing through her heart. Fail thus. Leave. Now. He was her mate, her partner, the man she had trusted with everything, her heart, her pack, her life, and he had cast her aside as easily as if she were nothing more than a forgotten memory. She could still see him standing there, his back turned to her, his jaw clenched in determination. The man she had once loved was now a stranger, a man who had chosen power over loyalty, greed over love. Kayla's hands clenched into fists at her sides, the anger surging within her. The betrayal cut deep, but it also ignited something inside her, something fierce. She had been cast out, but she wasn't broken. Not yet. She wouldn't let Dorian's actions define her. Her mind raced as the truth of what had happened settled over her. The pack had abandoned her too, following Dorian's lead. They had turned their backs on her, on everything they had built together. She had given them everything, her loyalty, her strength, and her love, and they had betrayed her without a second thought. But Kayla wasn't going to fade into the shadows. She wasn't going to let them strip her of her identity. I'll show them, she whispered to herself, her voice cold and resolute. I'll make them beg for my forgiveness. But for now, she had to leave. The pack had no place for her, but she would find a place where she could rebuild. She would find the strength to rise again, stronger and more powerful than before. The darkness of betrayal no longer frightened her. It fueled her. Kayla turned and walked into the woods, her heart heavy but determined. She would rebuild herself, and when she returned, she would be the alpha they feared. Chapter 2. Alone in the Wilderness. Kayla had never been one to shy away from the wilderness. As an alpha, she had spent countless nights in the forest, leading her pack, hunting and training. But now, as she moved deeper into the woods, the familiar sounds of the forest felt foreign. The birds didn't call to her like they once had, and the wind no longer whispered comfort. Instead, everything felt empty. She had been walking for hours, the weight of her journey pressing down on her shoulders with each step. She had no destination, no home to return to. Her pack was gone, and Dorian was lost to her. The pain of rejection was still sharp, but there was something else growing inside her now. Something cold, something dangerous. The quiet was broken by a rustling in the trees ahead. Kayla froze, her senses immediately sharpening. Her wolf was on alert, ears pricked, muscles tensed. She moved silently through the trees, her body moving fluidly as she followed the sound of the disturbance. In the clearing ahead she saw him, a man, tall and broad-shouldered, standing by a tree, seemingly lost in thought. He was drenched in the rain, his hair darkened by the moisture. His eyes, dark and piercing, scanned the forest with a predatory intensity. He was alone, but his presence was undeniable. He was no ordinary man. He was something more. Kayla's heart skipped a beat as her wolf recognized the scent. It was familiar, but there was something darker, something primal about it. This wasn't just a man. This was a creature of the wild, a predator, a werewolf. The man's eyes flickered toward her, and for a brief moment their gazes locked. She didn't move. She couldn't. Something about him held her in place. There was an undeniable force around him, like the calm before a storm. You shouldn't be here, he said, his voice low and commanding, yet there was a calm in it that unnerved her. This forest isn't for strangers. Kayla's lips curled into a half-smile. I'm not a stranger, she said, stepping forward, her gaze unflinching, and belong here just as much as you. The man's expression softened, a flicker of recognition in his eyes. You're Alpha, aren't you? He asked, his voice suddenly filled with curiosity. What are you doing so far from your pack? Kayla didn't answer immediately. She could feel the weight of her past pressing against her chest, but there was something in this man's presence that made her feel like maybe, just maybe, she could let her guard down. For the first time in weeks, she didn't feel completely alone. "I was cast out," she finally said, her voice low. "By the man I loved. By the pack I led." His eyes darkened, and he took a step closer to her. "Sen, you're in the right place," he said quietly. "You belong with us, where you can rebuild." Her chest tightened at his words, the weight of the promise hanging in the air. "Us? Ben to pack," he said with a quiet smile. "I'm not the only one who's been rejected, Kayla. There are others like us, misfits, outcasts, but together we can rebuild. You can rebuild." Kayla's heart skipped again, but this time it wasn't out of pain. This time it was hope. Maybe there was still a future for her. A future where she was in control. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice thick with curiosity and something else. Something like recognition. She knew she was standing before someone important. Someone whose presence was both a challenge and an invitation. "His name's Lucas," he said with a wink. "And I'm here to help you take back what's yours." Chapter 3. The Silent Invitation. The air was thick with the scent of rain. The damp earth beneath Kyla's feet soft and giving, the ground squishing under her boots. She hadn't realized how long she'd been standing there, watching Lucas, this stranger who felt so familiar yet so unknown, as he stood with his back to her. The silence stretched between them, heavy but not uncomfortable. Lucas's voice had been steady when he spoke, offering her something she wasn't sure she could trust, an invitation. She had been cast out, rejected by the pack. She had given everything to, and now in the quiet of the forest, this this man, was offering her a place among strangers, a chance to rebuild. But something about him, something about his calm certainty, made her feel like maybe, just maybe, she could believe in it. Believe in him. "You're offering me a place?" she finally asked, her voice tentative but laced with curiosity. "Just like that? After what I've lost, you think I can just walk away from everything?" Lucas didn't turn to face her at first. He continued to look at the distant trees, his posture relaxed, yet something in his body language suggested he was waiting for her to make the first move, to make a choice. His fingers drummed softly against his side, a subtle but steady rhythm. When he finally spoke, his voice was softer, though it still carried that same gravity. "You've already lost," he said, his words sharp yet gentle. "But you don't have to lose more. You don't have to keep running." Kayla's breath caught in her throat. The idea of running, of always running, always hiding, had become her reality, her second skin. And now, here, standing before this stranger who spoke as though he knew her pain, she felt a flicker of something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in so long. Hope. "I've been running for so long," she whispered, more to herself than to him. "From him, from the pack, from everything. I don't know how to stop." Lucas finally turned to face her then, his eyes locking onto hers with a depth that made her feel like he could see everything. Every scar, every crack in her walls. His gaze was intense, but not predatory. It was understanding. And that made her want to take another step toward him, to trust him, to let him in. "You don't have to stop, Kayla," he said, his voice softening as he took a step toward her. "But you have to stop running alone." For a moment, all she could do was stare at him. His words hung in the air between them, and the weight of them settled in her chest. It wasn't the promise of power that drew her in, it was the promise of belonging. Her hands trembled slightly as she crossed her arms, as if protecting herself from the vulnerability she felt threatening to overwhelm her. She had been alone for so long. The thought of giving in, of letting someone else in, terrified her. But beneath the fear there was a deeper longing, one she hadn't dared to acknowledge until now. She wanted to be seen. She wanted to belong. She wanted to stop being the woman cast aside by her own mate and her own pack. "I don't know if I can trust you," she said, the words a confession more than a statement. She had said them before to others, but they felt different now. More honest, more raw. "I've trusted before. And look where it got me." "I know," Lucas replied, his tone understanding, yet firm. He took another step toward her, the gap between them shrinking. "But I'm not asking you to trust me right away. I'm asking you to trust yourself." Her breath caught, her eyes narrowing slightly. "Trust myself? After everything I've been through, how can I do that?" "Because you've survived, Kayla. That's why you're still standing here." His eyes softened. "I'm not asking you to forget what happened, but I am asking you to stop carrying it on your own." His words struck her deep, resonating in a way she hadn't expected. How long had she carried the weight of her past alone? How long had she built walls around herself, pretending that she could handle everything on her own? She looked up at him, her chest tight with emotions she couldn't quite name. "And you think you can help me carry it?" Her voice cracked, and for a moment, she wondered if she had said too much. But the rawness in Lucas's gaze told her that he wasn't judging her. He was offering something more. "I can help you, yes," he said simply. "But more importantly, you can help yourself. You're an alpha, Kayla. And you don't have to stand alone." She swallowed hard, feeling the sting of unshed tears. She could feel them welling up, threatening to break through, but she refused to let them fall. Instead, she inhaled deeply, trying to find her center. "I'm not sure I can go back to what I was," she confessed quietly. "I don't know if I can trust anyone again. I don't know if I can ever be the alpha I was meant to be." Lucas stepped closer, closing the final distance between them. He reached out, lifting his hand to gently touch her cheek, his touch warm and steady. "You don't have to be who you were, Kyla. You just have to be who you are now. The alpha who's ready to rebuild." For a moment, Kayla stood still, caught in the weight of his touch, the sincerity in his eyes. Everything she had known, everything she had fought for, had been taken from her. But here, with this stranger, this man who knew her pain, she felt a spark of something new. Something that could never come from the pack she had lost, or the mate who had turned his back on her. It was the beginning of something different, something raw, something real. And maybe, just maybe, it was the start of the healing she never thought possible. Chapter 4: The Alpha's Choice. The quiet of the forest was both a comfort and a curse. The shadows wrapped around Kayla like an old familiar coat, both warm and stifling. She had spent years relying on the cover of night, the dense trees that shielded her from the world and the pack that had cast her out. But now, under the canopy of stars, with the moonlight filtering through the branches like a whispered secret, Kayla felt the weight of her loneliness press heavier than ever. Lucas had given her a choice she wasn't sure she was ready to make. His words echoed in her mind as she sat on the damp earth by the fire, the flames dancing in the cold night air. "You're an alpha, Kyla. You don't have to stand alone." He had spoken with such certainty, such raw conviction, that for a moment she had believed him. But the doubt crept in like a shadow, clouding her. Thoughts. Could she really take back what was hers? Could she truly rebuild her pack and her life after everything that had happened? "Is this who I am now?" Kyla muttered to herself, her voice barely a whisper over the crackling of the fire. A broken alpha trying to piece herself back together? The wind shifted, and she felt a familiar presence before she saw it. Lucas stood just outside the light of the fire, his silhouette framed by the trees, his posture tall and confident. His eyes, glowing softly in the dim light, met hers, and for a moment, the world around her seemed to disappear. His voice was steady, but there was an undeniable softness in it when he spoke. "You're more than broken, Kayla. You're stronger than you give yourself credit for." She lifted her gaze, meeting his eyes, the weight of his words sinking deep into her chest. She could feel the tension between them, the unsaid things lingering like smoke in the air. The connection they shared was undeniable, but it was also frightening. She had been hurt before, had been torn apart by the one person she had trusted the most. Could she allow herself to feel this way again? To trust him? Her heart pounded as she studied him, seeing not just the man who had offered her a chance at rebuilding, but the alpha in him, the same alpha that had seen her, recognized her strength, and had offered her a new beginning. But the truth gnawed at her, an ache that was hard to ignore. "Why me?" she asked, her voice raw with the vulnerability she rarely allowed herself to show. "And after everything, why would you want to be around someone like me?" Lucas stepped forward, closing the distance between them, and crouched beside her. His movements were measured, but there was a tenderness in the way he reached out to her, the way he tucked a strand of her hair behind her ear, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. His touch was warm, grounding her, reminding her of the possibility of something more. "You're not the broken woman you think you are, Kayla," he said softly, his voice full of conviction. "You've endured more than most could ever imagine, and you're still standing. That's strength. That's why I'm here. I see you. All of you." Kayla swallowed hard, the words tumbling around in her mind, fighting for meaning. His sincerity was like a balm to the wound she'd carried for so long. But the walls she'd built up, the ones that had protected her, were still there, cracks beginning to show, but not yet shattered. "I've been alone for so long," she whispered, her gaze dropping to the ground as she fought the tears that threatened to surface. "I don't know if I can let anyone in again." Lucas didn't pull away. Instead, he moved closer, his presence comforting, his warmth seeping into her bones. He placed his hand gently on hers, his thumb tracing small circles over her knuckles. The touch was simple, but it spoke volumes. He wasn't rushing her, wasn't demanding anything from her. He was here, in the quiet of the night, offering her his presence, his support. "You don't have to do it alone anymore, Kyla," he said, his voice gentle yet firm. "I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere." Her heart raced, the intensity of his words sinking deep into her chest. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe that there was more for her than the loneliness that had consumed her for so long. But doubt lingered, like a shadow in the back of her mind. Could she trust him? Could she let him in without risking everything? The fire crackled between them, the heat warming her skin, but it was the warmth in his eyes that truly caught her. She had spent so long running from her past, running from the pain and betrayal, but now, standing before Lucas, she felt something shift inside her. Maybe it was time to stop running. "And I don't know what the future holds," she said softly, her voice full of uncertainty. "But I can't do this alone anymore. Maybe it's time to rebuild, to try again." Lucas smiled then, a slow, knowing smile that made something inside her stir. "And we'll rebuild together, Kayla. And when it's all said and done, we'll make them beg for our forgiveness." The certainty in his words stirred something deep inside her, something she had buried for so long. Hope. Kayla's breath caught in her throat as she realized in that moment she wasn't alone anymore. Not in the way she had been before. She had found something, someone who believed in her, who saw her strength, and who was willing to walk beside her through the darkness. And for the first time in a long while, she felt the possibility of something more. Something worth fighting for. Chapter 5, The Price of Power. The morning sun broke through the dense canopy of trees, its light pale and filtered through the mist that lingered in the air. Kayla woke to the sound of birds calling, the world around her soft and quiet. But her mind was a storm. She had spent so many years looking for the power that had eluded her. The alpha blood running through her veins had once been a symbol of strength, a symbol of pride. But now it felt like a weight, an unshakable burden she didn't know how to carry. She sat up on the edge of the bed, feeling the coolness of the morning seep into her skin. The bed wasn't much, just a simple mat in the corner of a modest cabin. But it was hers, and that gave her a small sense of peace. It was a place of respite from the chaos that had consumed her life. She was no longer an alpha in a pack. She was no longer a mate rejected. She was alone, but somehow, that solitude felt safer than the false warmth she had once known. Her hand rested on her swollen stomach, and for the first time in what felt like forever, she allowed herself to feel the life growing inside her. The child she had once feared might be the only reminder of the man who had betrayed her, was now a part of her. A symbol of something pure, something good, a future. But that future, that fragile thread of hope, was still uncertain. As Kayla stood and stretched her arms above her head, she felt the weight of everything, her pack, her former mate, the promises she had broken, come crashing down once more. The path she had chosen was not an easy one. She had left the pack, rejected by those she had fought for, but now she had to rebuild. And rebuilding was never easy, especially when every step forward felt like a step further from who she once was. Footsteps outside the cabin door interrupted her thoughts, the sound of them slow but deliberate. She knew who it was before the knock came, Lucas. The man who had shown her a sliver of hope, the man who had promised her that she could rebuild, that she could rise again. But what was the cost? What would she have to sacrifice to claim the power she needed to take back what was hers? "Kayla?" Lucas's voice called through the door, low but filled with an urgency she hadn't heard from him before. "Can we talk?" Her heart beat faster, and her stomach clenched with a mixture of anticipation and dread. She had spent so much time building walls around herself, but with Lucas, it was different. He wasn't afraid to challenge her, to make her face the things she wasn't ready to admit, and it terrified her. "Come in," she called, her voice steady despite the rush of emotions inside her. The door opened slowly and Lucas stepped inside, his presence filling the small space. He looked different today. More serious, more determined. His dark eyes met hers, but there was something new there, something that made her heart skip in her chest. "And I think it's time we take the next step," he said quietly, his gaze never leaving hers. Kayla raised an eyebrow, unsure of where this conversation was headed. "What do you mean?" Lucas hesitated for a moment, his fingers tightening into fists at his sides, as if he were holding something back. He walked over to the table where she had been sitting earlier and placed a small map in front of her. "I've been gathering information about the packs in the area, about who's still loyal to you," he said. "There are wolves who still remember what you did for them. They remember what you gave up, and they're ready to follow you again." Kayla's breath caught in her throat, and her pulse quickened. The idea of returning to the pack, of taking back the power that had once been hers, was both thrilling and terrifying. Could she really do this? Could she reclaim what was taken from her without becoming the person she had feared becoming? "I'm not sure I'm ready to take that step," Kayla admitted, her voice quieter than she intended. "What if I fail again? What if I can't control them? What if I can't even control myself?" Lucas's face softened and he moved closer to her, his eyes never leaving hers. "Kayla, you've already proven that you're strong enough. You've survived the worst. Now it's time to lead. Not just for you, but for the pack you were meant to have." Her breath hitched as he reached out and placed his hand on hers. The contact was simple, yet it sent a shock of warmth through her. There was something in the way he looked at her. Something that made her feel like maybe she wasn't as lost as she thought. "You have everything it takes to rebuild, Kayla. You have the heart of an alpha. And I'll be with you every step of the way," Lucas said, his voice steady but filled with conviction. Kayla looked down at their hands, her pulse racing in her veins. She could feel the power of his words, the weight of them. But she also felt the weight of the decision she had to make. To take back what was hers, to rebuild the pack, to claim the life she had once lost, meant giving up something else. Something she wasn't sure she was ready to lose. "I don't know if I can trust them again," she said softly, her voice laced with the vulnerability she rarely allowed herself to show. "I don't know if I can trust myself." "You don't have to do it alone, Kayla," Lucas replied, his hand tightening around hers, grounding her. "I never will again. I'm here, and I believe in you." Her heart skipped a beat as she looked into his eyes, the sincerity in his gaze pulling her closer. For the first time in weeks, she didn't feel completely alone. She felt seen, heard, understood. The silence between them deepened as Kayla allowed herself to feel the truth of his words. The path ahead was uncertain, fraught with challenges and pain. But she wasn't the woman she had been when they first met. She had changed. She had grown. And now, for the first time in a long time, Kayla allowed herself to believe that she could rise again, stronger, fiercer, and more powerful than ever before. Chapter 6. The Weight of Destiny. Kayla sat on the edge of the bed, her back straight, her hands resting on her knees. The room was dim, the only light coming from the soft glow of the fire that crackled in the hearth. Outside, the wind howled as if in mourning, but inside a silence hung heavily, almost suffocating. Her mind was racing, her thoughts tangled in a web of fear and uncertainty. She had made a decision, one that had been building inside her since Lucas had offered his hand, since he had shown her the possibility of a new life. A life where she wasn't broken, where she could rebuild everything she had lost. But with every choice came a price. The power she sought, the respect she craved, would not come easily. She could feel it in her bones, the weight of her past pressing down on her, the fear of making the wrong move keeping her frozen in place. Lucas was right. She had the heart of an alpha, but that heart had been shattered. Could it still beat the way it once did? Could she still lead, still command with the same strength and authority she had before? The door creaked open, and Kayla's thoughts were interrupted. She didn't need to look up to know who it was. The heavy footfalls that entered the room were unmistakable. Lucas. His presence filled the space, his gaze steady and unwavering as he approached her, his steps slow, almost cautious. He had been giving her space, giving her time to process the weight of everything she had gone through. But now, as she sat there, lost in her own thoughts, his eyes softened, and a quiet understanding filled the room. "You're still awake," he said, his voice low, a note of concern threading through his words. Kyla nodded without saying anything, her eyes flickering toward the fire. The flames danced and flickered, casting shadows on the walls. The heat from the fire was comforting, but it didn't warm the ache that had taken root deep inside her. "I'd been thinking," she said finally, her voice a whisper, as if speaking too loudly might shatter the fragile peace they had built. Lucas sat beside her, his presence solid and grounding. "What about—" She hesitated, taking a deep breath before looking at him. "About everything. About the pack. About what I've lost. About what you've offered me." Lucas tilted his head slightly, his gaze never leaving hers. There was no judgment in his eyes, only patience. "And what have you decided?" The question hung in the air like a thread she was afraid to pull. But she knew she had to answer. She couldn't hide forever. "I'm ready," she said, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside her. "But I'm scared." Lucas's expression softened. He reached for her hand, his fingers gently brushing against her skin. The touch was light, almost tentative, but it spoke volumes. He wasn't asking her to be strong. He was simply offering her the space to be vulnerable. "You don't have to be afraid," he said, his voice soothing, like a balm to the raw wound she had carried for so long. "I'm here, Kayla. You don't have to do this alone." Her heart thudded painfully in her chest at his words. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to let herself believe that there was a way forward, that she wasn't too broken to lead, to love, to rebuild. But the ghosts of her past, the betrayal, the rejection, the pack that had turned their backs on her, were always there, lurking just beneath the surface. "I know," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "But what if I fail again?" Lucas didn't flinch. He didn't look away. He didn't even hesitate. "You won't, because you're not the same person you were before. You're stronger. You've fought through more than anyone else could even imagine, and I'm with you, every step of the way." Kayla closed her eyes, the weight of his words pressing down on her, and for the first time in what felt like years, she allowed herself to feel something other than fear. She allowed herself to feel hope. She reached for his hand, her fingers curling around his with a strength that surprised even her. She didn't know if she was ready to lead again, to reclaim the pack and the power she had lost, but for the first time in a long while, she felt like she might have the strength to try. I want to believe you," she said quietly, her voice thick with emotion. "But I'm scared, Lucas. I don't know if I can ever trust anyone again." "You don't have to trust everyone, Kayla," he said softly. "But you can trust yourself, and I trust you, more than anyone else ever could." Her chest tightened at his words, and her heart stuttered in her chest. She wanted to reach for him, to pull him close, but there was still so much fear inside her, so much uncertainty. Would she ever be able to trust again? Would she ever be the leader she had been before? But as she looked into his eyes, she realized that she didn't need to have all the answers. Not right now, not yet. She just needed to take the first step. "I'm ready," she said, her voice stronger now, her words more certain. "I'm ready to take back what's mine." Lucas smiled at her, his eyes full of pride. "Then let's do this. Together." The fire crackled between them, the warmth from the flames dancing in the air. And as Kayla sat there, with Lucas by her side, she realized that she wasn't alone anymore. The journey ahead would be difficult, but she no longer had to face it by herself. Chapter 7. Rebuilding the Pack. The morning after Kayla had decided to take back what was hers, the world seemed different. The air was thick with the weight of her choice, but there was also a strange sense of relief. For the first time in what felt like forever, she could breathe without the crushing burden of her past bearing down on her. The forest, which had once seemed like a place of escape, now felt like the beginning of something new. She stood at the edge of the clearing, her eyes tracing the horizon as the sun broke through the trees, casting a golden glow over the landscape. The pack she had led, the pack that had betrayed her, was out there somewhere, scattered. She could feel their presence like a pulse, faint but undeniable. But they weren't the same anymore. They were weaker, disorganized. Their loyalty to Dorian, the alpha who had cast her out, had frayed, and now it was her time to reclaim control. Kayla's fingers twitched at her sides, itching for the challenge, the power that had once come so easily. She wasn't the same woman she had been when she first led them. She had been broken, lost. But now she was ready. She had learned from the pain, from the betrayal. She had grown stronger. It was time to take her place again. Behind her, the soft crunch of footsteps on the forest floor caught her attention. She didn't need to turn to know who it was. Lucas had been there every step of the way, quietly supportive, his presence like a rock she could lean on, even when she had felt like the world was crumbling around her. "You're thinking of them, aren't you?" Lucas's voice broke through the silence, low and steady, as he stepped up beside her, his dark eyes scanning the clearing. Kyla nodded, her gaze still fixed on the horizon. "I have to. If I'm going to lead again, I need to know where they are, what they're doing." Lucas watched her for a long moment before replying. "They're scattered, lost without you. And they're waiting for you to come back, Kayla. They want you to lead them again." She turned to face him, her eyes narrowing slightly. "I don't know if I can trust them again. Not after what they did." Lucas's expression softened, his eyes full of understanding. He placed a hand on her shoulder, his touch grounding her, anchoring her in the moment. "They don't have to trust them all, Kayla. But you have the power to lead, and they'll follow you." Kayla's heart beat faster at his words, a mix of fear and excitement swirling inside her. She had been so afraid of failure, of losing everything again, but with Lucas's unwavering belief in her, she felt something stir within her, something she hadn't felt in a long time, hope. "I'm ready," she said, her voice steady, though the weight of the decision still pressed on her chest. "But I won't go back to them until I'm sure they're ready to follow me. I won't let them see me as weak again." "You're not weak," Lucas said, his tone fierce. "And you won't let them see you as weak. They need to see you as the alpha, the one who can lead them, the one who will make them beg for your forgiveness." The words hit her like a rush of cold water, sharp and revitalizing. She nodded, determination rising in her chest. She would make them beg. She would make them see her strength, her power, and the unwavering force of will that had been forged in the fire of rejection and betrayal. But I'll need your help," Kyla said, meeting his gaze, her voice steady with resolve. "I can't do this alone." Lucas's lips curled into a small smile, a look of pride crossing his features. "I'll never be alone, Kayla. I'm with you. And I'll help you take back what's yours." Chapter 8. Reclaiming Her Throne. The journey to find the pack was not an easy one. The forest stretched out before them, vast and wild, a reminder of everything Kyla had lost and everything she was about to gain. Every step forward was a challenge, a test of her resolve. She could feel the weight of the decision pressing on her chest. This was it. There was no turning back. As they neared the clearing where the pack had once lived, Kyla's heart pounded in her chest. The scent of wolves filled the air, and her senses sharpened, her wolf side responding to the proximity of her old pack. But something was different now. There was no sense of unity, no feeling of belonging. The pack had fractured, and the air was thick with uncertainty. Kyla's eyes swept over the gathered wolves, her gaze searching for familiar faces. They were scattered, some of them still loyal to Dorian, others uncertain, unsure of who to follow. And then there was Dorian himself, standing in the center of the group, his posture rigid and defensive. The moment Kyla stepped into the clearing, all eyes turned to her. The tension in the air was thick, and for a moment it felt like the world had stopped. Her heart raced, her body trembling with the adrenaline that surged through her veins. This was it, the moment she would reclaim her place as Alpha. Dorian's eyes met hers, his expression unreadable, but there was a flicker of something in his gaze, a mix of surprise, anger, and regret. He had not expected her to return. He had thought her broken, gone for good. But here she was, standing before him, stronger than ever. Kyla took a deep breath, steadying herself as she stepped forward, her voice carrying across the clearing with an authority she hadn't known she still possessed. "You have failed," she said, her voice cutting through the silence. "And you've lost your way, and it's time for someone to take charge. I'm that someone. I'm the Alpha, and you will follow me." The pack shifted uneasily, some wolves eyeing one another, others standing taller, their respect for her beginning to return. Dorian stepped forward, his jaw clenched, his fists tight at his sides. "Ow! Have no right to speak like that," Dorian spat, his voice full of venom. "None are nothing but a failure, Kyla. You left us. You abandoned the pack." Kyla's eyes flashed with fury. "I didn't abandon you, Dorian. You abandoned me. You cast me out. You left me to die. But I survived. And now I'm here to take what's mine." Her words hung in the air like a challenge, and the pack felt it. The tension thickened. But Kayla wasn't done. She would make them see her strength, her power. She would make them respect her. She looked around at the wolves, her gaze sharp and unwavering. I don't need your loyalty, not if it's given begrudgingly. I will take back what's mine, whether you follow me willingly or not. You will beg for my forgiveness, and when I'm done you will see that I am the Alpha. I always was. The air crackled with energy as Kayla's words landed, and for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, she felt the fire of leadership reignite inside her. This was her moment. Chapter 9. Unraveling the Past. The night hung heavy in the air, as if the world itself knew the storm that was brewing. The pack, once united by a shared loyalty to Kayla, now stood divided. Her return had caused ripples through their fragile unity. Dorian, the former mate she had trusted above all others, stood at the center of the growing tension. His eyes locked on hers with a mix of defiance and something Kayla couldn't quite place. She had called for this confrontation. She had demanded their respect. But now that she stood before them, with all their eyes fixed on her, she couldn't help but feel a flicker of doubt in her chest. What if they never forgive me? What if they never see me as their Alpha again? Kayla felt the weight of their stares, the quiet anticipation building like a pressure in her chest. It was as though the forest itself was holding its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. But this time Kayla wasn't afraid. She had come this far, and there was no turning back. Her gaze met Dorian's, and for a moment the world seemed to pause. The years they had spent together, the shared laughter, the whispered promises, the love that had once burned so brightly, felt like a lifetime ago. And yet, here he was, standing in front of her, as if nothing had changed. But everything had. You think you can just come back and take what's yours? Dorian's voice was cold, sharp, like the bite of winter air. His jaw clenched, his fists tightening at his sides, as if he were holding on to the remnants of his fading authority. Kayla's heart stuttered at his words, but she didn't let it show. She stood tall, her shoulders squared, every inch of her body radiating the strength she had fought so hard to reclaim. I didn't just come back, she said, her voice steady, cutting through the tension like a blade. I'm taking what's mine, Dorian. You and your pack have failed. You've broken the trust that was given to you, and now I'm here to remind you who I am. The silence that followed her words was deafening. The wolves around them shifted, their eyes darting between Kayla and Dorian, unsure of how to react. But Kayla wasn't finished. She needed them to understand, needed them to see the woman she had become, the Alpha she was meant to be. I led you all, and she continued, her voice rising with the force of her emotions. I protected you. I gave everything for this pack. And you, she pointed directly at Dorian, her finger trembling with fury. You turned your back on me. You turned your back on the pack. Dorian's face twisted with anger, but there was something else beneath the surface. A flicker of guilt, something Kayla had never seen in him before. He took a step forward, his chest heaving with every breath. You think you can just walk back in here, taking everything from me? You're nothing without me. Kayla's body tensed at his words, the raw venom in his voice slicing through her like a hot knife. I was never nothing, she said, her voice low and dangerous. I am everything you need, Dorian. I am the Alpha, and I'll make you and the rest of them beg for my forgiveness. The words hung in the air like a challenge, but Kayla could feel the power behind them. She wasn't just talking to Dorian anymore. She was talking to the pack, the wolves who had once followed her, the wolves who had left her behind. It was time for them to see her for who she truly was, the Alpha they had always needed. The wind picked up around them, rustling the leaves and making the branches creak as if nature itself had sensed the shift in the air. Kayla didn't flinch. She didn't back down. She would fight for her pack, for her place as their leader, no matter the cost. Lucas stood beside her, his presence a steady anchor as she faced Dorian and the pack. His eyes, filled with unwavering support, locked with hers. He wasn't here to fight her battles but to stand with her, to remind her that she wasn't alone. This doesn't have to be a battle, Kayla, Asara Lucas said, his voice calm but firm. We don't have to do this in anger. You don't need to make them beg. Kayla's gaze never wavered from Dorian, but she could feel Lucas's presence beside her, grounding her. He was right. She didn't want this to become a war. She wanted them to understand, to see that she had learned from her past mistakes, that she had grown stronger. I'm not doing this out of anger, Kayla said, her voice softening but still filled with authority. I'm doing this because this pack needs me. It always has. Dorian took another step toward her, his eyes dark and stormy. You think you can just walk in here and take control again? He spat. You're nothing without me. Kyla's heart thundered in her chest, but she didn't let his words break her resolve. I am everything you need, she said, her voice steady, her words biting. You lost your way. And now it's time for me to lead. Dorian's chest heaved as if the weight of her words was sinking in. But he didn't respond. Instead, he turned his back on her, walking away with slow, deliberate steps. Kayla's heart ached at the sight, but she didn't let herself falter. She had come this far. She couldn't let his rejection define her any longer. Let him go, Lucas murmured, stepping closer to her, his voice calm and gentle. You've already won. Kayla didn't answer immediately, her eyes still fixed on Dorian as he retreated into the shadows. Her breath caught in her chest as she turned to face the pack. The wolves were watching her, their eyes filled with a mixture of awe and uncertainty. It's time for a new beginning, Kyla said, her voice rising, her power undeniable. This pack is mine, and you will follow me. The silence was thick with anticipation, but Kyla didn't flinch. She wasn't just reclaiming her place as Alpha. She was taking back her life. And this time, nothing, no one, would stand in her way. Chapter 10, Reclaimed by Blood. The air was thick with tension as Kyla stood at the center of the clearing, her gaze sweeping over the pack before her. The wolves, once loyal to her, now watched with uncertainty in their eyes. It had been years since they had seen their Alpha standing before them, and it was clear that they weren't sure what to make of her return. Some still looked at her with reverence, while others couldn't hide the doubt etched on their faces. And then there was Dorian. Dorian, the man she had once trusted with her heart, who had rejected her and cast her out, now stood at the edge of the gathering, his arms crossed tightly over his chest. His face was unreadable, but Kayla could see the flicker of something behind his eyes. Regret, perhaps? Or was it just a reflection of the shattered bond they once shared? For a moment, everything felt like it was spinning out of control. Kayla had come here to reclaim her place as Alpha, to restore the pack to its former glory, but the weight of the past still clung to her, a constant reminder of what she had lost. Her breath hitched as she remembered the night Dorian had cast her out. She had stood before him, vulnerable and exposed, pouring her heart out, only to have him look at her with cold indifference. The pain of that moment still lingered, a scar on her soul that she didn't know how to heal. But now, as she stood before him and the pack, she knew one thing for sure: she wasn't the same woman who had left all those months ago. The pain of her rejection had shaped her, yes, but it had also made her stronger. She was the Alpha. She would make them see that. You're still the Alpha, Lucas whispered beside her, his voice barely audible against the backdrop of the stormy winds. His presence was a steady comfort, a reminder that no matter what, she wasn't alone. Kayla turned her head slightly to meet his eyes. His expression was calm, but there was a flicker of something deeper, something protective in the way he stood beside her. It wasn't just that he believed in her. He was willing to fight beside her, to help her rebuild everything she had lost. Oh, I am, she whispered back, the words heavy with both certainty and fear. And I'll make them see that. Without another word, she stepped forward, her footsteps measured and sure, the sound of them cutting through the silence like a declaration. The pack parted to make way for her, their eyes on her every move. Dorian didn't move, but his gaze followed her every step, his body stiffening as she drew nearer. Kayla stopped just a few feet from him, her gaze unwavering. She could feel the weight of their shared history, the unresolved tension that still clung to them. Both. She could feel the intensity of his eyes on her, the silent question in the space between them. Kyla, Dorian finally said, his voice rough, like gravel being ground underfoot. The sound of her name on his lips stirred something in her chest, but she refused to let it show. She couldn't afford to be weak, not now. You shouldn't be here, he continued, his words cold, but there was a tremor in his voice. Cunt, you left. You walked away from everything. From me. Her chest tightened, the familiar ache of his betrayal surging within her, but she pushed it down. This wasn't about her pain. This was about the pack. This was about reclaiming what was hers. Sinai didn't leave, she said, her voice steady, unwavering. You cast me out. You rejected me. But I'm back, Dorian. and I'm here to take what's mine." For a moment there was only silence. The pack, once so certain of Dorian's rule, watched intently, as if waiting for him to respond, to do something. But he didn't. He stood there, his eyes locked with hers, as if searching for something, some glimmer of the woman he had once known. "You're not the same," Dorian said quietly, his voice tinged with a mixture of regret and disbelief. "You've changed, Kayla." "I'm stronger," she replied, her words cutting through the tension like a blade. "And I've learned. You didn't just take away my title, you took away my pride. But I've found it again. And I'll make sure you all remember why you followed me in the first place." She turned away from him, her gaze sweeping over the pack. The wolves were still, their eyes wide with uncertainty, but they were watching her now, waiting for her to prove herself. "Get in line," she ordered, her voice commanding. "If you want to follow, you'll have to earn it. If you want to be part of this pack, you'll have to prove your loyalty. We're rebuilding, and I will not allow anyone to stand in my way." One by one, the wolves began to kneel, their heads bowed in submission. It wasn't immediate, but it was undeniable. They remembered her. They remembered the alpha she had been, and now they saw the alpha she was becoming again. Kayla had always been the leader they needed. She just had to remind them. But Dorian didn't kneel. He remained standing, his arms crossed tightly over his chest, his jaw clenched. Kayla's eyes locked onto his, and for a brief moment, she saw the man she had once loved. Flashes of the connection they had shared, the passion that had once bound them. But that was gone now. The past was dead. She couldn't afford to dwell on it. "Are you going to stand there and watch?" she asked him, her voice low and laced with authority. Dorian's eyes flickered with something, regret, guilt, but also something more. His lips parted as if he wanted to say something, but no words came out. The moment stretched on, heavy with the tension between them. Finally he spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "I never wanted to lose you, Kayla." But Kayla didn't let his words soften her resolve. She couldn't. Not after everything he had done. "I'm not yours to lose anymore," she said, her voice cold, final. "You lost me the moment you cast me aside." With those words, Kayla turned her back on him, her body stiff with the power of the decision she had made. The pack was hers again. And with Lucas by her side, she would rebuild it, stronger, fiercer, more loyal than ever before. Chapter 11, The Tides of Leadership. The sky had deepened into shades of violet, and the air around Kayla seemed to thrum with the electricity of a coming storm. The pack was settling around the clearing, each wolf still uncertain of their place. The few who had stood behind her before, the ones who had been loyal to her, who hadn't been swayed by Dorian's charisma, were watching with bated breath. The others, the ones who had once followed Dorian, shifted uneasily, their eyes flicking between Kayla and their former alpha. Kayla's heart beat steadily in her chest, her confidence solidifying with each passing moment. There was no turning back now. She had taken the first step, but there were still mountains to climb, still battles to be fought. And Dorian, despite his rejection, stood in her way. Her eyes cut toward him. He stood with his arms crossed, his eyes narrowed, but there was something in his stance now. It wasn't defiance anymore. It was something darker, something more resigned. She could see it in the way he held himself, tightly wound, ready to snap at the first sign of vulnerability. But Kayla wasn't vulnerable anymore. Not in front of him, not in front of the pack. The firelight flickered, throwing long shadows across her face as she approached the center of the clearing, her movements deliberate, precise. There was a quiet authority in the way she carried herself, and the pack felt it. Every wolf in the clearing, every pair of eyes that watched her, now knew what she was capable of. With each step, her wolf surged inside her, a primal force that demanded respect. Kayla had been born to lead, but it wasn't just the blood that ran through her veins. It was the fire in her soul. She had been rejected, betrayed, and cast out, but she had survived. She had thrived. When she spoke, her voice rang out with a calm that surprised even her. "And you've been led astray," she said, addressing the pack. But her eyes never left Dorian. "You've been lost without a leader who truly sees you. I'm not here to punish you. I'm here to lead you. If you want my forgiveness, you'll have to earn it." The words hung in the air, but they didn't fall on deaf ears. The wolves stood silent, their expressions varying from admiration to skepticism. Kayla felt the weight of their gazes, but she didn't falter. She couldn't. Dorian's jaw clenched, and his eyes darkened. "And think you can just come back and claim what's mine?" He spat, his voice harsh, a growl of anger lingering beneath the surface. Kayla's breath caught in her throat for a brief moment. It was the same old Dorian, the man she had once trusted, the man who had broken her. His anger, his pride, it was all still there, but she wouldn't let it deter her. "I never left, Dorian. You cast me out. You betrayed me." Kayla's voice broke through the thick tension, stronger now, the fury of the past rising to the surface. "But I'm not here to relive our history. I'm here to rebuild, and that starts with you." Her gaze was unwavering as she locked eyes with him. Her pulse quickened as she took a step forward, but it was not out of fear. It was out of strength. It was out of purpose. Dorian was not her mate anymore. He was not her equal. She would make sure of it. "If you want to lead," she continued, her voice rising with authority, "you'll have to prove you're worthy. You'll have to prove you can stand on your own. But right now, I'm the Alpha. I'm the one who will lead this pack to strength. And you," she took another step, closing the distance between them, "will stand aside." The air between them crackled, the pack watching in silence. Dorian didn't move for a long moment, his chest rising and falling with each breath. He stared at her, disbelief etched across his face. But there was a flicker of something else there, too. The wolves could see it. Respect. The recognition that Kayla was not the broken alpha he had cast out. She was something more. "You think you can just take it all back?" Dorian finally asked, his voice quieter now, but the tension in his words palpable. "You think the pack will just follow you without question? Without understanding what happened? Without seeing what you've become?" Kayla's gaze softened for a brief moment, the weight of his words settling on her like a cloak. She had always known Dorian could never fully understand what she had gone through. He had never felt the sting of betrayal the way she had. He had never had to pick up the pieces of his own broken heart and put them back together again. But now, standing before him, she realized something that she hadn't allowed herself to acknowledge until now. He wasn't the man she had fallen in love with anymore. He was just a memory. And memories couldn't hold her back. Not anymore. She stepped closer, their faces inches apart, the space between them alive with tension. "I don't need your approval, Dorian," she said softly, her voice quiet but firm. "And I don't need you. I never did. I am the Alpha, and I will lead this pack with or without your help." For the first time since her return, she saw it, Dorian's mask crack. A flicker of pain, of understanding, flashed in his eyes before it was gone, replaced by the anger she knew all too well. But this time, Kayla didn't flinch. She didn't step back. She stood her ground. He clenched his fists, his lips pressed tightly together, and for a long moment, Kayla thought he might challenge her. But then, he took a step back. Just one. It wasn't a submission, not yet. But it was a beginning. A small, silent acknowledgement that she was right, that the pack no longer belonged to him. "Fine," Dorian said, his voice tight, the words clearly forced. "But don't think for one second that this is over." Kayla's lips curled into a smile that was both cold and satisfied. "It's not over. Not yet." She turned to the pack, her eyes sweeping over the wolves, the ones who had remained loyal, the ones who had given up on her, the ones who had once followed her. "I will lead you," Kayla said, her voice commanding, full of purpose. "But you must earn my trust again. You must show me that you are worthy. And if any of you think you can challenge me, I dare you to try." Her words hung in the air, sharp and heavy with meaning. The wolves shifted uneasily, but Kayla felt the shift in the atmosphere. This was the moment she had been waiting for. The moment she reclaimed her power. Dorian, standing at the edge of the clearing, watched her with a mixture of disbelief and reluctant admiration. The pack, her pack, was hers again. And this time, nothing would stand in her way. Chapter 12, The Silent War. The tension in the air was palpable, a thread of electricity that hummed between the pack and Kayla. It wasn't just the weight of her words that had shifted the atmosphere. It was her presence. The quiet strength that emanated from her like a steady pulse. She was no longer the alpha they had cast aside. She was something more, something that no one could ignore. The wolves gathered in the clearing, their eyes darting between Kayla and Dorian, who still stood with his arms crossed, a silent storm brewing in his chest. Kayla could feel the eyes on her, the weight of the pack's expectations pressing down on her. Some of them were still unsure, uncertain of what she had become. Others, the ones who had never truly turned their backs on her, were watching with cautious hope. But it was Dorian who held her attention, the one who had once been her mate, the one who had rejected her without a second thought. His gaze never left her, a mixture of anger, pride, and something else she couldn't quite place. He had always been a man of control, a man who believed in dominance and power. But Kayla was no longer the woman he had pushed aside. She was different, stronger, fiercer, and far more capable of leading than he could ever understand. "Is this really the woman you want to follow?" Dorian's voice cut through the silence, harsh and biting. "She's a failure. She's nothing without me." The words hit Kayla like a slap in the face. The rawness of his accusation, the cruelty behind it, stirred something deep within her. But she didn't flinch. She couldn't afford to. She was Alpha now, and this pack needed to see that. "You're wrong," she said, her voice steady but laced with authority. "And don't need you, I never did." Dorian's eyes flickered, and for a brief moment, Kayla saw a crack in his armor, a flash of something vulnerable beneath the anger. But it was gone as quickly as it appeared. He stepped forward, his presence imposing, his body language radiating challenge. "Is this really how you want to do this?" Dorian's voice was quieter now, but there was a dangerous edge to it. "Do you think you can just walk in here and take everything from me, from us?" Kayla's pulse quickened, but she didn't back down. She stood tall, her shoulders squared, her body brimming with the power of her wolf. "I'm not here to take anything from you, Dorian. I'm here to remind you of who I am." Her words hung in the air, thick with tension, as she stepped forward, closing the distance between them. She could feel the heat radiating from his body, the anger crackling in his movements. But she didn't waver. She couldn't. This was her moment. The pack was silent, watching, waiting. The world around them seemed to hold its breath, the trees swaying gently in the wind as if they too knew the weight of what was happening. The moment was suspended in time, every second stretching on as Kayla and Dorian locked eyes, the unspoken history between them heavy in the air. Dorian took another step closer, his eyes narrowing. "And you think you can lead them? You think they'll follow you after everything that's happened? You think they'll respect you?" Kayla's breath caught, the pain of his words striking deep, but she didn't let it show. She didn't let him see the crack in her armor. She had been through too much to let him tear her down now. "And they will follow me," she said, her voice calm but firm. "Because I'm the Alpha, and I will make them respect me." Her words were like a challenge thrown into the air, and Kayla could feel the shift in the pack. The wolves were watching, unsure of what would come next, but something had changed. They were seeing the woman she had become, the woman who had fought for everything, the woman who had risen from the ashes of her own despair. "I'm not afraid of you, Dorian," Kayla said, her gaze unwavering. "Not anymore." The air between them crackled with energy, the tension building to a breaking point. Dorian's jaw clenched, his fists tightening at his sides. Kayla could see the conflict in his eyes, the battle between the man he had been and the Alpha he had tried to become. For a moment, Kayla thought he might strike out at her, that the anger he felt would spill over into violence. But instead, Dorian's shoulders slumped, his head hanging low in what could only be described as defeat. "You've changed," he murmured, his voice barely audible. "Tina didn't think you'd come back like this." Kayla stood silently for a moment, her heart pounding in her chest. She'd always known Dorian as the Alpha, her mate, the one she trusted, the one who had once shared her dreams. But now, standing before him, she saw him for what he was, a man who had failed, a man who had given up. "And I'm not the one who changed, Dorian," Kayla said, her voice quiet but firm. "You did." She turned away from him, her eyes sweeping across the pack. It was time to move forward. It was time to rebuild. The wolves shifted uneasily as Kayla's gaze met theirs. "The time for games is over," she said, her voice rising with authority. "This pack belongs to me now. And if you want to be part of it, you'll have to prove yourselves." She paused, her chest tightening with the weight of her words. She could feel the eyes of the pack on her, some filled with doubt, others with hope. But she didn't waver. She was Alpha now. She was the one who would lead them. One by one, the wolves began to kneel, their heads bowed in submission. Some did so grudgingly, but others did it with respect, their eyes filled with a newfound reverence. And as Kayla stood at the center of the clearing, the fire in her chest burning bright, she realized that this was just the beginning. There would be challenges, obstacles, and doubts along the way, but she was ready. She was the Alpha, and she would make them beg for her forgiveness. Chapter 13, A Leader's Burden. The wind howled through the trees as Kyla stood at the edge of the clearing, her gaze fixed on the horizon. The pack had been quiet since the confrontation with Dorian, the tension still lingering in the air like a thick fog. It wasn't just the pack that was unsettled, it was her too. The weight of her decisions pressed heavily on her shoulders, the fear of what might come next threatening to undo the resolve she had built. She had taken the first step, she had reclaimed her place as Alpha, but the path forward was murky, uncertain. The pack, though loyal in their hearts, needed guidance. They needed her strength, and she wasn't sure she could give it to them. Not yet. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of footsteps behind her. Lucas. She didn't need to look to know who it was. His presence had become a steady comfort, his silence a reminder that she wasn't alone in this fight. He came to stand beside her, not speaking at first. There was a gentleness to the way he moved, a quiet respect in the space he gave her. He knew better than anyone the weight she carried, knew the burden of leadership, of reclaiming what was lost. Kyla let out a shaky breath, feeling the cool breeze brush against her skin. She closed her eyes, savoring the moment of stillness before she had to face the wolves who were waiting for her to lead. Torian's not going to make this easy, she said, her voice tight, her words low, almost drowned by the wind. I can feel it. He's angry. And he's not going to accept this without a fight. Lucas's eyes never left her, the steady warmth of his gaze unwavering. No, he won't. But you're not alone anymore. You've got more than just your past to fight for now. Kayla turned to face him, her gaze meeting his. His words were simple, but they carried weight. She had always fought alone, fought to protect a pack that had rejected her, fought to survive the betrayal that had torn her apart. But now, with Lucas by her side, she had someone who understood. Someone who believed in her when she couldn't believe in herself. I don't want to be this person, she whispered, the words slipping from her mouth before she could stop them. I don't want to be the Alpha. Not if it means destroying everything I once cared about. Lucas stepped closer, his presence solid and grounding, as though he could sense the fragility of her resolve. He reached out, gently brushing his fingers against her arm. The contact was light, but it sent a shiver down her spine. He wasn't pushing her to make a decision, but simply offering her a reminder she wasn't alone. So you don't have to destroy anything, Kayla, he said, his voice soft but firm. You're not here to burn bridges. You're here to rebuild. The pack doesn't need you to be perfect. They need you to be real. They need you to be the Alpha you've always been. Kayla closed her eyes, taking a slow breath, the weight of his words sinking in. She had been so focused on the fear of what had been taken from her that she hadn't realized the possibility of what she could create. She could rebuild. She could lead with strength and vulnerability, both at once. I'm scared, she admitted, the words escaping her before she could stop them. I'm scared of failing again. I'm scared of becoming the person I was before, the one who let fear control her. Lucas's hand rested gently on her shoulder, the warmth of his touch steadying her. Fear's natural. But you're stronger now. You've learned from your past, and you've already shown them what you're capable of. Kyla looked at him, seeing the sincerity in his eyes, the unwavering trust he had in her. She had never allowed herself to be vulnerable in this way before, had never allowed herself to lean on someone else. But with Lucas, it felt different. He was her strength without asking for anything in return. He believed in her, and for the first time, Kayla felt herself starting to believe in her own power. I'll lead, she said, her voice gaining strength with each word. But I'm not doing it alone. I need them to see me, to see that I've changed. You don't need to prove anything to them, Kayla, Lucas replied, his voice low but filled with certainty. And you've already done that. They just need to see the Alpha in you again. The Alpha who's ready to fight for her pack. Her chest tightened at his words, the weight of his faith in her settling deep in her heart. It was a quiet truth, but it was enough to light a spark inside her. She could do this. She had to do this. Not just for herself, but for the pack that needed her. Thank you, she whispered, her voice thick with emotion, for believing in me. Lucas smiled softly, his eyes filled with warmth and something more, something Kyla wasn't ready to name just yet. Always, he said, his voice a promise. Kayla looked around, the pack still waiting in the clearing. The wolves were looking to her for guidance, for the strength they had once known in her. She took a deep breath, gathering the courage to move forward. "I'm ready," she said, her voice steady with newfound conviction. "It's time to take my place as Alpha." With Lucas by her side, Kayla stepped into the clearing, her head held high, her heart steady. The pack watched, waiting, unsure of what would come next. But Kayla knew one thing for sure: this was her moment. She wasn't the broken woman who had left. She was the Alpha who had come back stronger, ready to lead them all. And with that, Kayla's journey to rebuild her pack, her life, and her future began again. Chapter 14: The Final Confrontation. The air in the clearing was thick with anticipation, the scent of pine and earth mixing with the subtle tang of the impending storm. Kayla stood in front of her pack, her body rigid with the intensity of the moment. The wolves were assembled before her, their eyes flickering with uncertainty, loyalty, and a small spark of hope. The weight of the past, the rejection, the betrayal, the years of silence, was heavy in the air. But Kayla was done carrying it alone. The wind began to pick up, howling through the trees, as if the forest itself was urging her forward. She could feel the familiar stirrings of her wolf beneath her skin, a pulse of power that surged with every beat of her heart. She was ready. She had always been ready. But now it was time for the pack to see it too. With a deep breath, Kayla stepped forward, her gaze sweeping over the group. They had followed her once. They had trusted her once. And now, they were waiting to see if she could still be the leader they needed. "Enough!" Kayla's voice rang out, firm and clear, cutting through the murmurs that had begun to rise among the pack. Her heart raced as she looked at each of them, seeing the uncertainty in their eyes. "I'm not here to beg for your forgiveness. I'm here to take back what's mine." Her words landed like a stone dropping into water, creating ripples in the silence. She could see the wolves tense, their bodies taut with the energy of the moment. Some of them, the ones who had never truly turned their backs on her, were watching with something like admiration. But the rest, those who had once followed Dorian, were hesitant, their loyalty shaken. Kayla didn't flinch. She had made it this far, and there was no turning back. "Dorian," she said, her eyes locking on his. He stood off to the side, his expression unreadable, his body tense. The man who had once been her mate, the man who had cast her out, now stood apart from her, a ghost of the Alpha he had once been. Dorian didn't respond, but Kayla could see the storm in his eyes, the silent battle waging within him. He didn't want to lose her. He didn't want to lose the pack, but he had already lost her once. Kayla's lips pressed into a firm line. "I am not here to fight you, Dorian. I'm here to lead. I'm here to reclaim what's mine. Not for me, but for us. For this pack." There was a beat of silence, and then the first movement came from the wolves, slow, hesitant. It was the head of the pack, a large, strong wolf named Jede, who stepped forward, his eyes wary but intrigued. "Kayla," Jede's voice rumbled, low and respectful. "We've missed you, but we've also feared what you've become. There's no going back, is there?" Kayla swallowed the lump in her throat. "No," she said quietly, but firmly. "There's no going back. But there is moving forward." The pack watched as Kayla turned her gaze back to Dorian. The tension between them was a physical force, the air charged with the weight of everything unsaid. There was still a piece of her that wanted to reach for him, to fix what had been broken between them. But that was a part of the past she couldn't carry into the future. "I don't need your forgiveness, Dorian," Kayla said, her voice steady, but her heart ached with the truth of her words. "I need you to understand that I am not the same woman I was. I am stronger now. I will lead this pack, whether you're with me or not." The storm raged in Dorian's eyes as he stepped forward, the power of the Alpha still pulsing beneath the surface. But there was a shift. Kayla could feel it, the way the air seemed to still. The battle for dominance had ended, not in a fight, but in understanding. Dorian didn't want to lose the pack, but he also knew that Kayla had earned her place. With a slow, reluctant nod, Dorian dropped his gaze. "Lead us then," he said, his voice tight but laced with something Kayla couldn't quite define. "Once show us that you can." Kayla felt a strange relief wash over her, as if a weight she hadn't realized was there had lifted. She wasn't just leading them out of necessity, she was leading them because she had the strength to. The pack, the one she had once feared losing forever, was hers again. "I will," Kayla said, her voice rising with authority. "And we will rebuild this pack, stronger than ever before. Together." And with that, the pack began to move, their steps tentative but certain as they began to align behind her. Kayla felt the pull of her wolf, the strength of her lineage surging through her veins. She was Alpha, again. And this time, nothing would stand in her way. Chapter 15. The Dawn of a New Era. The forest was alive with the sounds of wolves, the rustling of leaves in the wind, the distant calls of the pack settling into their new place under Kyla's leadership. It had taken time, weeks of rebuilding trust, of proving herself not just to the pack, but to herself. But now, standing in the clearing, Kayla could feel the pulse of the pack as one, a singular unified force. She had done it. She had reclaimed her place. But even as the pack settled into a new rhythm, there was still work to be done. Kayla had been given her power back, but with it came the responsibility of guiding them all forward. The path ahead was clear in some ways, but full of shadows in others. She had rebuilt the pack, but she couldn't stop there. There were still threats in the distance, both external and internal, and she couldn't be complacent. Not now. Her gaze swept across the gathered wolves. The pack was stronger than it had ever been, but there was a lingering uncertainty, a fragility. She could feel it in the way they looked at her, some with newfound respect, others still tentative, unsure if they could follow her fully. Trust, she knew, was not something easily won back. Yet she was different now, too. She had faced rejection. She had stood on the edge of losing everything. But now, she was the one in control. The Alpha. The leader. The strength she had forged through pain and betrayal now radiated through her. She wasn't afraid anymore. She would lead them to greatness, or she would die trying. Kayla stood on the rise at the edge of the clearing, the wind brushing through her hair, feeling the weight of her decisions. But this time, the weight didn't crush her. It anchored her, rooted her to the earth, to the pack she was now responsible for. "Kayla." Lucas's voice cut through the air, a gentle but firm sound that made her turn. He stood beside her, his eyes full of pride and something deeper, something unspoken. His unwavering belief in her had been a constant anchor in the turbulent waters of her emotions. Without him, she wasn't sure she could have made it this far. "How does it feel?" he asked quietly, his voice a low rumble, filled with curiosity and tenderness. Kayla paused, considering the question. She looked out at the pack, their movements steady now, their eyes filled with the beginnings of loyalty and trust. She could feel their eyes on her, but it no longer felt like a burden. It felt like the beginning of something new. "It feels like freedom," she finally said, her voice soft, almost wistful. "Like I finally stepped into the person I'm meant to be." Lucas nodded, a small smile playing on his lips as he took a step closer to her. "And I think you've always been that person. You just had to believe it first." Kayla's chest tightened at his words. The weight of his belief in her, the way he had always seen her even when she couldn't see herself, was something she hadn't allowed herself to feel. She hadn't allowed herself to need anyone. Not until now. Turning to face him, Kayla felt a warmth in her chest, something unfamiliar but deeply comforting. She reached out and placed her hand on his, the connection between them solid and grounded, just as it had always been. They had been through so much together, betrayal, fear, and grief, but in this moment, she realized just how much she had grown, how much they both had grown. "I'm not sure I could have done this without you," Kayla admitted, her voice barely above a whisper, vulnerable in a way she hadn't allowed herself to be before. Lucas's eyes softened as he leaned in slightly, his hand squeezing hers. "And you didn't have to. I was never going to let you go through this alone." For a moment, Kayla let herself lean into the comfort of his words, the steady support he offered. She wasn't alone. Not anymore. The clearing behind them rustled as the pack began to stir, a quiet hum of movement, as wolves made their way back to their dens, to the homes they had carved out of the land they now ruled together. Kayla knew they still had a long way to go. There were still wolves to train, territories to secure, and alliances to mend. But the foundations had been laid. The pack had its alpha again. Kayla's heart swelled with a mixture of pride and exhaustion. She had done it. She had rebuilt everything that had been taken from her. But more than that, she had rebuilt herself. She was no longer the woman she had once been, the one who had doubted herself, who had been cast aside. She was the woman who had taken control. She was the Alpha who had risen from the ashes. The wind whispered through the trees as the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the clearing. The world seemed to hold its breath as Kyla stood tall, her gaze sweeping across the pack. "I'm ready," she whispered to herself, the words a promise she was finally ready to keep. "This is just the beginning." Chapter 16, The Alpha's Legacy. The full moon hung low in the sky, its silver light cascading over the pack as Kayla stood at the edge of the clearing, her eyes fixed on the horizon. The soft rustle of leaves, the distant howl of wolves, and the crackle of the fire were the only sounds that broke the stillness of the night. The air was thick with anticipation. For the first time in a long while, Kayla felt at peace, her heart steady, her mind clear. The pack had come together, their loyalty to her growing with each passing day. But she knew that the true test was not the fight to reclaim her place. It was the journey she now had to lead them on. The trust she had worked so hard to earn still felt fragile, like a delicate thread that could snap at any moment. She wasn't just their leader, she was their hope, their guide. And that responsibility weighed on her like the world itself. But as she looked out over the clearing, Kayla realized something else. The weight she had carried for so long, the one that had almost crushed her, was finally gone. She had reclaimed not just her alpha position, but her life. She was ready to lead them into a future of strength, unity, and honor. She had learned that the greatest strength came from vulnerability, from facing her fears and accepting that she wasn't alone. And it was that realization that allowed her to stand firm, no matter the challenges ahead. Behind her, the pack had gathered, their eyes on her, waiting for her to take the next step. And beside her, always by her side, was Lucas. His presence had been her anchor, his belief in her a steady force that had carried her through her darkest moments. She turned to him, her heart swelling with the quiet understanding that had blossomed between them. "Until we've done it," she said softly, her voice filled with a mix of exhaustion and triumph. "We've rebuilt it." Lucas's smile was small but full of pride. "We haven't just rebuilt, Kayla," he said, stepping closer. "We've created something stronger, and we'll keep building it. Together." The weight of his words sank deep into her chest, and for the first time, Kayla allowed herself to fully understand the meaning of what they had done. They hadn't just rebuilt the pack, they had forged a new future, and she was no longer running from her past. She was facing it head-on, ready to lead her people into a future they could all be proud of. "I couldn't have done it without you," Kayla whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "You've believed in me when I couldn't believe in myself." Lucas reached for her hand, his fingers brushing over hers with a tenderness that was almost reverent. "I've always been stronger than you knew. You just needed someone to remind you." Kayla squeezed his hand, feeling the connection between them deepen. She wasn't just an alpha anymore. She was a woman who had found her strength, who had learned to trust again, who had learned to love, not just the pack, but herself. And that, above all, was the most powerful transformation of all. The sound of approaching footsteps caught their attention. The pack was moving toward them, their faces filled with a quiet, newfound respect. Jarek, the head, wolf who had once been skeptical, now stepped forward with a nod of acknowledgement. "Alpha," he said, his voice steady but filled with admiration. "We stand with you. The pack is yours." Kayla's chest swelled with pride, but there was no arrogance in her. She didn't need to prove herself anymore. She had earned their respect, and she would lead them with honor. "I know," Kayla said, her voice strong. "And we will move forward together. We'll rebuild what we lost, and we'll protect what we have. The strength of this pack lies in unity, and we will never forget that." One by one, the wolves stepped forward, each offering their loyalty, each acknowledging her as their alpha. The moment was quiet, intimate, as though the forest itself was holding its breath. And in that silence, Kayla felt the truth of her leadership settle over her like a cloak. This was her pack, and she was ready to lead them into the future. As the pack gathered around her, the fire crackling in the distance, Kayla looked up at the moon, its light bathing the clearing in silver. The past had been painful, filled with rejection and betrayal. But it had also shaped her, had made her stronger. And now, under the light of the moon, she knew she was ready for what came next. She wasn't just the alpha of this pack. She was the woman who had fought to rebuild her life, to reclaim her strength, and to lead with the courage she had never known she possessed. And with Lucas by her side, and the pack rallying behind her, Kayla knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, she would face them with unwavering strength. The journey was far from over. But for the first time in a long while, Kyla was ready.